Hello, everyone. Welcome to a day that we have been waiting for, but we're not expecting. Not this season, anyway. A rematch with the Florida Panthers from 2 seasons ago, and we all know how that went. I can sit here and say all day long that I think that it's different. I'm sure a lot of other people believe that. You kind of have to believe that if you're a fan of this team because for all their faults, they've defied many odds many times before. If you think about 2019, they weren't supposed to win more than one game against Washington, and they won that series and knocked the defending Stanley Cup champions off. They were not supposed to walk into Long Island, take two in a row, and then take two more at home to complete the first 4-0 win. Notice what word I'm not using in a playoff series in franchise history. They were not supposed to continue being good after that. Above all, this season, it was supposed to be the end of the world. Shea and Pesci being gone was supposed to be the downfall of the franchise. Everybody who thinks that they know anything about this team were really on this narrative, this idea that the subtractions that were had in free agency and then the additional Mikko Rantanen situation that occurred later would ultimately be the downfall of the franchise and that they would take years to recover from it, if ever. Multiple fans of multiple teams who are no longer in the Stanley Cup playoffs or have not made them in a long time, Buffalo, have stated that this was going to be the year that the Canes finally missed and the wheels started coming off. Well, here we are. And to all of you who said those things, especially if you said it in bad faith, fuck you. That's going to be the last thing I have to say about that. So, that being said, one thing to consider, strap in. This is going to be a very bumpy ride. This series is going to be rough. I know that I overestimate typically. I overestimated New Jersey. I said Canes in 6, they won in 5. I said Washington in 7, Canes 1 in 5. There is next to 0% chance that Carolina wins this series in less than 7 games, and I'm going to go into detail on that with the data that I have pulled and that I have in front of me. And we're going to be talking about a lot of things in extensive detail for about the next hour or so. I'll get to as many comments as I can, but there's actually a decent amount of information in here, and there's some stuff that's not on display that I'm going to talk about a lot. So, first things first, I will get to some of these comments. All Canes Network, what's up, buddy? I'm busy tailgating. Let's go, Canes. Yeah, have fun, pal. Enjoy the ride. We're not supposed to be watching hockey tonight. We're not supposed to be watching the Canes tonight, but here we are. Everybody said it was over. Now, I'm going to toot my own horn here a little bit. I remember at 12:30 on July 1st, I told a lot of people to calm down, and a lot of people told me to shut the fuck up. I never had, the idea that the Canes were going to go to the conference finals again, but I knew it wasn't the downfall of the franchise. If nothing else, we were just going to have a fun 2019 type of year, and there has been more doubt this season than there was when the Canes started making the playoffs again and equal results. So think of that what you will. J-Dub, what's up, buddy? Let's fucking go, boys. Yes, absolutely. Dylan Bollinger, what's up, dude? Winning tonight is crucial, even if it wasn't for Toronto. That's true. If Carolina wants to set things in motion to be able to win this series, it starts tonight. And it's not just about this series. It's not just about the potential of being in the next series, which is obviously the most important one. I don't know how many of y'all are superstitious. I'm incredibly superstitious. I could talk for an hour about my superstitions. Whether you're superstitious or not, it is probably in the back of many people's minds, the players, the coaching staff, the organization, the fans, whatever, that this is meme material at this point if Carolina were to not win a game in this series. And it's probably on their minds, especially guys who were here last time. One thing I talked about on Caniac Sessions yesterday, I feel like Andrei Svechnikov, and again, shout out to Magneto Kane for making that really awesome graphic. I told him, I gave him an idea of what I wanted, and he ran with it, and it looks great. Andrei Svechnikov has a chip on his shoulder because Andrei Svechnikov knows he was having the best year of his career, and then he got hurt. And he knows, and everybody else knows, except for that new guy on 32 Thoughts, that he would have made a difference in that series. Andre Kasha would have made a small difference. Max Pacioretty would have made a moderate difference, but Andrei Svechnikov would have made a world of difference potentially. If I had a crystal ball to look in, I think Carolina potentially wins that series if Andrei Svechnikov is available. Devil's Joint, how you doing, my good friend? Woo. Fly Henry Fly says, should we go out for Marner? Do you think we can turn him into a playoff performer? Yes, I absolutely do think that we can turn him into a playoff performer. Now, I would rather try and get other players potentially, but if Marner's available for the right price, I think that you do bring him in. And I think that I know I've criticized some systematic and game management decisions that Rod has made, but one thing that I will say until I go to my grave is that when it comes to getting another gear out of players, getting more out of them, getting, more than, he finds an extra gear in players that I think that even the player themselves does not know that they have. Rod gets the best out of everybody he coaches, and anyone who does not conform to Rod's style, Eric Halla, Mikko Rantanen, so on and so forth, they're gone, and they're gone for a reason. Martin Necas had more raw God-given talent than anybody that ever played for the Hurricanes. That didn't mean he was a good fit. He's an incredible player. I legitimately believe that if he can fix small things in his game, he's a top 10 winger in this league. But Rod has an ability to get things out of players that nobody else sees. So I do think that Marner would find another gear playing for Carolina, yes. But we'll talk about that extensively between whenever Carolina is done playing this season and when free agency comes about. I wouldn't be surprised if Carolina maybe trades for his rights before then if they really want him. We will see. I think he would be high risk, high reward, but ultimately a good fit. And once he learned to adapt to that style that Rod wants him to play, I think that he will get there. I really do. And the idea of having I don't want to call him an elite winger, but he's close to one. Marner with Aho, and maybe you can make Jarvis a second line center since he was drafted as a center. And I think that he's got that ability. That being said, I think if you're going for a low risk, high reward, I think Ehlers is a better guy to ultimately fit the system. It's definitely something to consider. I know that a lot of people talk about Matthew Nyes. I would love to get Matthew Nyes. I think he fills a need. Ultimately, Marner is a better player than Matthew Nyes, but I think that Matthew Nyes fills a need that the Hurricanes have because he has a similar skill set to Mikko Rantanen, and I think his ceiling's a little bit higher. I think he could ultimately be a little bit better than him. So that's one thing to consider with that. Fly Henry Fly says, I think he kind of fit in like Gensel did. Yeah, I could see that happening. With him having as good of a two-way game as he has, I think he could. Devil's Joint says, I have more Canes top sticker cards for you. Yeah, I saw your message. I just didn't get a chance to get back to you. Get Marner to the West Coast. That wouldn't be the worst thing to happen. Good player go out West, and, likeliness is neither one of our teams would see, one of 16 teams in the Stanley Cup Finals. That wouldn't be the worst outcome by far. Fly Henry Fly says, I love Necas so much. I still don't know why we couldn't find a way to get him on a line with more offensive talent like Aho. Yeah, Necas, he just didn't fit. I mean, it ultimately ended up being a square peg, round hole situation. And like I said, I got all the respect for Martin Necas' ability, but ability doesn't always mean good fit. And I think that's where there was a bit of a disconnect that ultimately led to him getting traded, because when they signed him to that 2-year, 6.5 AAV, I was like, yeah, he's gone. Like I already knew it then. Then it looked like, okay, he's turning around. Maybe he will stay here long-term and be an impact player for this team. But the thing is, Necas just had those inconsistencies in his game that just would never fit with the Hurricanes. Todd Davis says Marner won't take a hit to make a play just like Necas. Yeah, Marner does shy away from physicality a little bit. I think where Marner makes up for that potentially as a Hurricane is him having 200-foot play and being more defensively minded. A lot of people got mad when he got named a Selke finalist a couple of years ago. I thought he deserved it. I really did. I'm not a Mitch Marner stan by any means, but I do see how he could improve the Hurricanes. It's kind of risky for them to take on, considering one, you're going to sign him for 7 years, more than likely, and you're going to pay him at least $11.5 million. At that point, I think Ehlers would be a safer bet and leave you a little bit more money left over. So that's it's not a question of how good of a player Marner is. It's more of a question of fit. Whereas Nikolai Ehlers, I feel like, could be a Hurricane on day one and just roll right into it with the way that he plays. Non-Nate just was physical with Colorado these playoffs. Yeah, I didn't get to watch much of that. I only got to watch Game 7, really. J-Dub says Game 1 is less than 3 hours away. Fuck the offseason. Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get there, which I hope that the offseason discussion is put off for about 3 to 4 more weeks. All right, so let's go ahead and pull this up here. All right, so I'll leave this up here for a second for disclaimer purposes, and I'll talk about some other stuff here real quick. So when we get into this, one of the things I'm going to talk about is that this isn't just about line matchups, goaltending matchup, who has better defense, who forechecks harder. All those things are factors, of course. I think when we as fans look back on this series, there's going to be certain things that we look at in isolation. For example, I'm going to be looking at certain individual player matchups. How much better does Jacob Slavin do than Gustav Forsling? Can Aho start to have, generate the discussion that he's taking the mantle from his countryman Sasha Barkov as being the top 200-foot center in this league? Those are the types of things that need to be looked at, or that I think will be discussed when this series is over. Is Seth Jarvis going to put up more goals than Sam Reinhart? Is Andrei Svechnikov going to get the better of Matthew Tkachuk every shift that they're on the ice against each other? Those are the things that I really want to look at as the series goes on and when it's over. We'll talk about that more near the end. All right, so speaking of, team leaders here and everything, relatively even for the most part. I'm going to talk a lot about Florida's third line because that line killed Toronto and it has the potential to kill the Hurricanes. So as far as goals go, Andrei Svechnikov with 8, Sam Bennett with 6. Sebastian Aho has 7 assists. E2 Luostarinen and Brad Marchand, who are playing on that third line, are both combined for 9 assists. Sebastian Aho, even though he only had 2 points in the last round, and in the terms of offense, he was a little quiet. 8 points, 3 goals, 5 assists. E2 Luostarinen and Brad Marchand combined for 3 goals and 9 assists. They both have 12 points. Points by defenseman, Shane Gostisbehere has 10, which is to be expected. What's a little bit of a surprise here, Nate Schmidt, who is much more of a depth shutdown guy. I don't even want to call him a depth guy. He's definitely a good second or third pair shutdown guy. He's not a scrub by any means. I actually really like him. He has 7 points. That's pretty uncharacteristic for him. I don't think he'll maintain that. And when I looked at the box score, I'm pretty sure that no other Florida defenseman had more than 2 points. So, or I think Seth Jones did. Actually, let me double check myself on that real quick, because I'm actually curious now. I might have remembered it incorrectly. Let's see. Defenseman. Points. Okay, yeah, I was incorrect about that. Seth Jones has 6, Aaron Ekblad has 6, Dmitry Kulikov has 4. So even their shutdown type of defensemen are contributing offensively. Shane Gostisbehere, you expect him to have these kinds of numbers. Power play goals, Sebastian Aho has 3. Those were all in the Devils series. 2 of them being in Game 5. Power play goals on the other side, Matthew Tkachuk and Carter Verhaeghe both have 2. Shots on goal, Andrei Svechnikov, to be expected, 35. And him having 8 goals out of 35 shots on net and hitting the post several times, that's good news. Sam Reinhart has 41. He's their guy that shoots the puck the most, to be expected. Shots blocked, Jacob Slavin, 24. He leads the Hurricanes by a lot in that regard. Gustav Forsling has 20. Jacob Slavin, 23 minutes and 33 seconds average time on ice. Seth Jones, who's become an all-situations defenseman and is playing the best he has played in years for Florida, has 25-45. They're leaning on him heavily. Florida's defense is good, but I don't think that it's as deep as Carolina's. For hits, Andrei Svechnikov and Eric Robinson both have 43. Sam Bennett has 63. And I talked about this a little bit on Caniac Sessions yesterday. When it comes to Washington, let's say Tom Wilson comes out of the lineup, the big, scary physicality that they supposedly have goes with him when he goes out. If Sam Bennett comes out of the lineup, Florida still has plenty of people who throw the body. There's still Tkachuk. There's still Verhaeghe, who's relatively physical. And the list, Marchand, E2 Luostarinen, and Anton Lundell are all physical guys, and they fit in together on that third line that has become very utilitarian for Florida down the stretch and in the playoffs. That's another thing to consider with that. As we go on here, so looking at the overall record here, Carolina has played 10 games, won 8 of them. Florida, I don't want to even call this struggling because it's not. It was surprising that they lost the first 2 games to Toronto. To me, I thought that they would at least split that in Toronto. you'll notice these numbers seem a little bit off, but as this series goes on, I think they're all going to get closer. Goals for per game, Carolina is 3.75, or excuse me, that's backwards. Florida should have yeah, that's backwards. So Florida should have 3.75, Carolina has 3.40. Goals against per game, Carolina 2.4, or should have 1.80, Florida 2.42. Overall goal differential, Carolina plus 16, Florida also plus 16. 5-on-5 goal differential, Carolina plus 5, Florida plus 9. Power play, 28.1% for the Hurricanes, 20% or 20.5% for the Panthers. That is something that we need to keep an eye on. Special teams in general. Penalty kill, 93.3% for the Canes. One of the few power play goals they've allowed was a 5-on-3 goal. That's the only power, or they've allowed 1 5-on-3, 1 5-on-4. If they can maintain that standard against Florida coming up through this series here, they win. They will win the series if they maintain that. If they somehow come out of the series and only allow, let's say it goes to 7 and they only allow 3 power play goals, Carolina probably wins. Penalty special teams net percentage, this will not stay this way. Carolina 60.7 to 55% for Florida. That's going to get closer over the course of the series. Face-offs, that's backwards as well. Sorry, I kind of put this particular slide together in a hurry. 50.1 for Carolina, 45.8 for the Panthers. So I was really tired when I started putting this one together last night. All right, so the advanced stats, I put these in, day after Florida and Toronto finished up, so these are going to be a little bit more accurate in regards to how they should be. Total expected goals, Carolina is 41.03 to Florida's 38.23. 5-on-5 expected goals, 26.91 to 26.86. This is going to be an incredibly close battle, 5-on-5. When it's all said and done and we look at what filled the needle for both teams, 5-on-5, I think, will be neck and neck. If it is not neck and neck, then Carolina probably lost. And if it's one of those things where if it's a blowout, whether you're talking about a single game, a single period, or the series as a whole, if it's a blowout, Carolina probably lost. If it's a close series, either team could win. Corsi percentage, 5-on-5 Corsi percentage, 58.78 for Carolina versus 56.74 for Florida. To be expected, Carolina has a little bit of a shot volume edge. Fenwick, 5-on-5 as well, 57.07, 55.04. One of the things that's really good news for the Hurricanes is the Fenwick and the Corsi percentage being close. That means a lot of their shot attempts are getting through to the net as opposed to getting blocked. The one problem with that is that's the good news. The bad news is that Florida is very similar with a 56.74 Corsi and a 55.04 Fenwick. Power play expected goals for Carolina has 7.43 to Florida's 7.96. Penalty kill expected goals against 5.98 for Carolina, and they have allowed far less than that as far as actual scoring to 7.55 for the Panthers. Expected goals for percentage, 5-on-5, 53.80 for Carolina, 56.50 for Florida. That is not a huge difference, but over the course of a 7-game series, it will probably become a larger margin, and it can really become a factor then. 57.10 expected goals for percentage total. Carolina with 57.10. This is all situations to 55.11 for Florida. Total versus expected, Carolina with 41.03 expected goals have scored 34. Florida is scoring above expected. They have 38.23 expected goals and 45 actual goals. Now, that might be alarming on the surface, but let's keep in mind they did blow out Toronto in 2 of those games in that last series. And I think that's where that total, I don't want to call it inflated. They did earn their goals, but that is something that can be a little worrisome for the Canes, but it's not something that they can't overcome. Now, I put a lot of heat maps in this one because this is going to be, like I talked about before, Carolina playing against the last 2 teams was asymmetric warfare. This is symmetric warfare. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about the heat maps themselves, but I want to talk about what they represent here. This is the 2 hardest forechecking teams in the National Hockey League, at least in the Eastern Conference. This is 2 of the hardest forechecking teams in the NHL playing against each other. And it's going to be brutal. So when it comes to, give me 1 second, guys. Sorry, Frankie was being a little bit crazy. When it comes to 5-on-5 here, you'll notice Florida, lower volume, but not much lower volume. There's still a decent amount of volume shooting and a decent amount of chance prevention at the other end. Now, if you look at the right side of these 2 heat maps here, you'll notice that there's a little bit of a gap in places where Carolina likes to shoot the puck. The reason for that is because they take so many shots from the point. So that's why that area above the, or to the left of the face-off dot on the top graphic, the bottom face-off dot, that's why there's a gap there where it seems like there's not been a single shot taken. When you look at Florida, they have a similar gap further to the right, but not nearly as much, or not nearly as much volume, limited shot locations. But when you go into the high danger area in front, Florida's got a much bigger map. Now, where these teams have some similarities, yet Carolina has an advantage when you look at the defensive side of things. Carolina is not giving up a whole lot from the point. They gap up really well on that. Now, that's not going to make a huge difference against Florida because they don't shoot the puck from the point nearly as much as Carolina. That being said, they have a bunch of guys who are very, very capable in that regard, primarily Seth Jones and Aaron Ekblad. Those are the two biggest defensemen that you have to limit in this case. So if you do an overlay of these things, they don't look all too dissimilar. And one day I'm going to start doing that where I do overlays of these maps and everything. Now here, this is a power play versus penalty kill comparison. It's just one of those things I wanted to kind of visually demonstrate what Carolina is doing as far as preventing, or as far as generating chances on the power play. They're not giving up much shorthanded. There's only been 2 shorthanded scoring chances against them this entire playoffs. Florida gives up a little bit, or Florida gives up a little bit more. I'll show that in a second. So here, taking a look at the bottom one, you'll see where Florida concentrates their penalty kill at. It almost mirrors, with the exception of when you get closer to the boards, it almost mirrors what Carolina does on the penalty kill. But the difference is Florida has not gone up against a team defense that's as good as what the Hurricanes have had going on for them in the playoffs. That's going to be difficult for them. And that's where Carolina can eventually maybe eke out that little net positive 5-on-5, because it's not going to happen in the offensive zone for Carolina. There will be sustained pressure, but as far as turning it into a track meet and outscoring them in their own end constantly over and over, that's not going to happen. Same thing as before in regards to the other slide. It's just this time it's Florida's power play versus Carolina's penalty kill. And the good news for Carolina on this, attempts against on the left side on the bottom graphic, that is a very, very limited heat map. There is not much going on there for any other team. If they can continue to do that, then they have a much better chance of winning this series. All right, edge data, team speed. Usually Carolina has a pretty definitive speed advantage. This time they do not. 2.94 for max speed versus 2.86. That's not much of a difference. Now, roughly 0.3 of a mile an hour it can be a big difference in terms of an isolated individual situation. 2 guys going for a 50-50 puck, or the difference between somebody getting a breakaway and not, or someone being able to make a defensive play and getting burned. It's not as big of an advantage as they normally have. Distance, Florida covers average more per 60 and per period, but over the course of an entire game, Carolina covers more. Now, the reason I want to point that out is the longer that this series goes on, and this is why I say a 7-game series would favor a chance for Carolina to win. After a while, the legs start getting tired. After a while, the other team gets exhausted. This is how Carolina wins series. Over the course of time, those numbers in isolation start to favor Carolina. For example, in the first period, Florida may be just as fast. In the first period of game 1, Florida may be just as fast as Carolina. But by the third period, Carolina's the faster team. They're moving more. They're dominating puck possession, and they're skating circles around them in their own end. And then you repeat that process over the course of 7 games. And then next thing you know, Carolina's dominating a game from beginning to end. That's how it could work, the war of attrition through speed. So that's one thing I wanted to point out with this. Edge data, shooting. Carolina does not have an advantage here. That being said, Florida played 2 more games than Carolina, and they blew Toronto out in 2 of them. So that kind of inflates this number a little bit. But this series in isolation, shots on goal will more than likely favor Carolina. Shooting percentage will probably favor Florida. And the column in the middle is going to be the one that's most important. I think that if Florida's offense dries up by game 5, Carolina has a good chance to win this series. Now, you'll notice where the shot locations come from here. It's a pretty big dissimilarity in terms of overall shot volume from the point, shot volume from both sides of the interior. And then when you get closer to the net, that's where these numbers really start to differ. For example, inside of the left circle and everything. Carolina 21 and 27, 75 in the slot, 8 and 8 on both sides, and 6 like right there in front of the net. And then a bunch of stuff coming from behind and some stuff coming from behind the net. Florida has better numbers behind the net there. And part of the reason for that is because when they forecheck, they go and they grind, they get pucks, they dig them out, they throw them to the front of the net, and then at least one, sometimes two guys are crashing to go get that rebound and try and bury that puck. When you start talking about who's putting shots on the point and going to get pucks more, that's Carolina. Florida is a little bit more convicted about taking it to the front of the net and trying to make a scoring chance out of that. Carolina is more likely to cycle it back to the point. And I think over the course of this series, you're going to see those numbers change a little bit to where the volume shooting up top is coming predominantly from Carolina, and Florida is not doing it so much, especially if Carolina's on their game with it. Goals. Again, this is something a little bit more important to look at here. Carolina's getting a little bit more in terms of up top, but then you go lower and lower and lower, and then Florida starts to even it out. And then when you get to that high slot area, this is one of the things I was just talking about on the previous slide. You look at that area right there between the dots in the low slot right there. Florida has scored 20 of their 45 goals in that area. This is where Carolina's ability at man-on-man defense and shot suppression will come in handy. This is where you can keep Florida on the exterior and limit their chances. You can keep the Canes on the exterior too. The difference is they'll still throw the puck at the net and then try and go get it after the fact. Florida tries to impose their will and force their way to the front of the net. The best thing Carolina can do to prevent that from happening in the first place, have good gaps, keep them on the exterior, and make sure that they don't get a shot in the first place or that they can't just bowl their way to the front of the net. And if the team defense is clicking, Florida will not get all those high goals from the slot. But that's the only thing about it that Carolina has. That's the only thing Carolina can really do about that is prevent them from getting to that area in the first place. Keep their players from setting up screens, keep them from establishing a net front presence, let them get there first. Vice versa, Carolina needs to impose their will in front of that net. Sergei Bobrovsky, we already know how good of a goalie he is. No goalie is immune to blindness. No goalie stops 100% of pucks that are deflected in at funny angles. If Carolina has a bunch of goals that are like the last two that are the last one that Jordan Stahl scored against Logan Thompson, and same thing with Andrei Svechnikov, low to the ice like that in the case of Svechnikov, I think that they will fare a little bit better from that. Shooting percentage, again, take a look at that slot area for Florida on the right. 29.4. That is amazing, even for being in that close. Carolina, not so much there, but that's not where they get their shots from and everything like that. But there's certain places on this map where Carolina has 10% for example, up there at the top of the left circle. 10% for Carolina, 0% for Florida. They don't shoot the puck from everywhere like Carolina does. That's one thing that could play in Carolina's favor as long as they take care of things in their own end, but they have to get to Bobrovsky early. Zone time. You'll notice that this is not much of a difference at all. The reason for that is Florida is a heavy forechecking, impose your will type of team as well. They don't do it so much through speed as they do through physicality, even though they've got the speed to supplement that capability that they have. 46.4% for Carolina, 45.0% for Florida in the offensive zone. If that number flips and stays flipped during the series, Carolina does not win. Neutral zone. This is one thing where you have to really be on your horse with the transition game here because Florida's got a good one too. There's only a 1.2% difference there. And when you go in the defensive zone, 34.7 to 37.5. Now, Carolina, this is one of those teams where they should be able to impose quicker zone exits than they've had in the past, theoretically. Those will pay dividends because if you're having quick zone exits, that means Florida's not spending a whole lot of time down there. And more importantly, they're not bullying their way to the front of the net and they're not keeping you and they're not working to the interior of the ice. If you have games where Freddie Anderson only has to make 19 saves and you win, Carolina wins this series. Now, speaking of Freddie Anderson and speaking of the goaltending, here's the matchup that we have here. Goals against average for Frederik Andersen of 1.36, at save percentage of 0.97, 7 wins, 2 losses, and 9 games played, including the one where Timo Meier totally didn't injure him on purpose. Now, Sergei Bobrovsky, 8 wins, 4 losses, 2.31 goals against average, save percentage 0.901 in 12 games played. Now, Bobrovsky's numbers may look like they're sagging a little bit. Don't take that into account too much because they played against Toronto, which has a lot of weapons up front. They just don't defend as well. And then when they do fall off a cliff and can't score, we've seen what happens to them. Kind of the same thing with Tampa, even though Tampa, I think, is a more complete team and defends a little bit better. So Bobrovsky's numbers will not stay the same in the series because Carolina's not going to score as much as Toronto did in a lot of situations. Freddie Anderson, the biggest difference between him and last season, he's playing more like he did in 22-23 than he did last season. Last season, maybe he was injured and playing through something, because one of the things I noticed about Freddie Anderson, if he's not 100%, like if something is bugging him, if he's got an injury nagging him, he doesn't do a good job sealing the post. And we know how Chris Kreider scored that one particular goal that was basically the beginning of the end in that whole situation. When that starts happening to Freddie, that's when he starts not making timely saves. That has not been a problem in this postseason. If it continues to not be a problem, that's a good thing. So if Freddie can maintain what he's doing, then he's got a pretty good shot to win the goaltending matchup in isolation against Sergei Bobrovsky. Best thing you can do, continue to throw pucks on net, but the biggest thing is you got to screen Bobrovsky. You've got to take his eyesight away from him. No goalie is immune to blindness. Goalie matchup continued here. So you'll see where a lot of these guys are making their saves from and everything like that. Sergei Bobrovsky is excellent at making saves in the slot area. Like he's really good at it. He's got a very quick reaction time. He's good at moving post to post, and he's got some size to boot on top of that. And also he's got experience. He can play angles. He can kind of anticipate where shots are coming from well before anybody else knows where they're coming from. You can say that about pretty much any goalie who gets paid to play the game, but Sergei Bobrovsky does it at another level. So one thing you'll notice here, Frederik Andersen has not had to make as many saves near the goal line as Sergei Bobrovsky has. Part of that is because of how good Carolina is at suppressing shots, suppressing passes, taking passing lanes away. So as long as you have a good collective defensive effort at that end, I think Freddie Andersen will hold up his end of the bargain with the way that he's been playing. Shots against, same thing. You're not getting a ton from the exterior, but there's a bunch coming to the middle. Goals against. So you see where Bobrovsky is giving them up, though, is right there in that high slot area. Screen him. Annoy him. Make him see a bunch of things that aren't there. One of the things that I was talking about in regards to the series winner that Svechnikov got, everyone wants to quantify that as a lucky goal. You have to be good to be lucky in a situation like that. And what I mean by that is if Svechnikov elevates that puck, either Logan Thompson gloves it down because he catches with his right hand. He's one of two goalies that do that, and they both play for Washington, actually. Either Logan Thompson gloves that down with his right hand, or he lets that puck go because it's nowhere near being on net. Svechnikov had the wherewithal to keep that puck low to the, and he did it on purpose. Svechnikov had the wherewithal to keep that puck low to the ice so that way there's a lot of visual clutter down there. And if you've watched some of my previous streams, I talked about this a lot. There's a lot of visual clutter down there. There's skates, there's stick blades, there's multiple different colors of tape on those stick blades, there's legs, there's shin pad, there's all kinds of stuff there. The more elevated a puck is, the more likely you're to see it on its own with absolutely no visual clutter there. That's the type of shots they need to take against Bobrovsky and then make those second effort follow-ups on rebounds to be able to make that happen. Then save percentage locations and everything like that. Freddie's got some pretty good advantages in some of these. I'll give you a second to look at that. And then we'll catch up on the comments here. Caleb, I saw what you just said. I'll address that in a moment. Thank you. All right, and then the last thing here, I normally don't pull this particular part of the edge data, but considering we're coming out of a best-of-7 series and going into a best-of-7 series here, I think it is important to point out that the goal differential that is supplied by the guys in front of these goalies heavily favors Florida. There's been some times where they had to, they've been able to score. If Sergei Bobrovsky has a bad night, and that's not to say that Carolina's not capable of it. They showed that in Game 5 versus the Devils. If Sergei Bobrovsky has a bad night and he's not on top of his game, Florida is still well equipped to outscore that problem. Carolina, maybe not so much, but if they play to their strengths, it never gets to this point anyway. But if Carolina can also rattle Bobrovsky early, it becomes a completely different situation. All right, so potential advantages here. I'm going to catch some heat for this, but I'm sticking with this. This is an uphill battle for the Canes. If I came in here and said that it wasn't, I'd be lying to you guys, and I'm all about telling you what's actually on my mind. Overall 5-on-5 play, offense and defense, Panthers. The biggest reason why that's an advantage, their top 9 is scary. And when you're talking about the forward groups, Carolina doesn't really have an on-paper advantage until you talk about who your fourth line is, or for the sake of not numbering the lines, your bottom 3 forwards, the last 3 on your depth chart. That's where Carolina, I think, has an advantage over Florida. But other than that, Florida has a total and complete advantage when it comes to the top 9. That's not to say that they can't get shut down. That's not to say that they can't be prevented from scoring and all kinds of other stuff. But Florida on paper, and that's why I call it potential advantages. It doesn't mean definitive advantages. Florida does have that. Scoring forwards, high-producing forwards, Panthers. Andrei Svechnikov is the only reason I thought about typing the word close next to that right now. Now, that's not to say that Carolina doesn't have, that's not to say that Carolina doesn't have plenty of offensively capable players. They do, but they're going to have to kick it to another gear if these games turn into track meets. Overall forward depth, expected scores plus depth, Panthers, I put close on that, thanks to how good Carolina's fourth line can be, and they're going to have to be in this series. Those guys are going to have to make it. Everybody's going to have to make a difference. The Stahl line in particular is going to have to go out there and shut the Barkov line down at home, especially because if you take 2-0 from the beginning, if Carolina wins today, the narrative changes. If Carolina wins on Thursday, the narrative is on life support. All 6 defensemen, I'm saying Canes. I put close there reluctantly. I still think Carolina is significantly better in the defensive department. That being said, I'm going to pull up what Caleb Sharp here said. Chatty is officially out tonight, so that means Morrow's in. If you follow me on X, you already know I don't agree with that decision, but I've not agreed with a lot of the things Rod has done in this playoffs, but, so far everything's worked out fine with Rosovic. So I'm just going to shut up because, every decision he's made has worked out fine. I don't know if this one will. I'm actually not expecting it to. I'm actually I don't understand why he's not putting Nikishin in. So that's the whole thing about it. Power play unit 1, I'm going to give that to the Panthers. Overall power play, if you account for both units, Panthers, but that's a lot closer. Penalty kill, Canes. Even though it's the first and second penalty kill in the playoffs with Carolina being first and Florida being second, I still think Carolina's penalty kill is so good it's not close when you're talking about the only penalty kill that is near it that's remaining in the playoffs. Goaltending, Panthers, I put close on that primarily because of how well Frederik Andersen has played lately. Freddie's taking it to another level since 2023. Overall advantage, Panthers, but I'm going to say close on that because Carolina can, and one of the reasons why I say that, Carolina, and actually, skeleton here, system equal Canes, it's not on the board. Yeah, when it comes to system, I think the Canes have a better system than Florida. Despite that being said, they are very similar systems. They're not exactly the same. They have some differences. But if I broke it down into 10 degrees of separate to 10 different points, it would be 8 of them would be common. That's how similar I think that they are. So winning elements is going to be the last one I go to. Then I'll get to some of the comments here, and then I'm going to start thinking about what I want to have for dinner. And I'm also going to take a short nap because it was hot today. Nothing like the last 2 series for either team. And what I mean by that is Carolina is completely different. They have everybody. They're healthy. Everybody who's super important anyway. Didn't have Svechnikov last time, didn't have Pacioretty last time, didn't have Kasha last time. And yes, I factor Kasha into that because in 4 1-goal games, Andre Kasha, when healthy, could have made a difference. Individual matchups, like I talked about in the beginning, will be just as important as line matchups. Winning the small battles will pay dividends later. This is going to be a trench war. Every loose puck is going to matter in some way or another. It's going to be a domino effect. You might lose a board battle now, and because of it, you get scored on 3 minutes later because there's no whistles. Or you might ice a puck now and you get scored on 2 shifts later because you couldn't get a complete line change. That's the type of things that could go on in this series. Limit Florida scoring chances. Carolina is fully capable of this, and I expect them to do so, especially at home with having last change. That could turn the tide of the series. If you can manage to do that on the road to Florida, that would be huge. Match physicality. Don't try to beat them at their own game. I had this exact sentence in the Washington series forecast. That's how important that is. Avoid the psychological warfare, especially from that third line. Don't let Brad Marchand do what Brad Marchand does. Svechnikov, if he's not taking stupid penalties, and he's not, he's had 1 minor penalty in this entire series. If Andrei Svechnikov is not taking penalties, nobody should be taking stupid penalties. Get to Bobrovsky early, screen him, get to him, get inside his head early, take his eyesight away, get a couple of soft goals on him, you might melt him. Logan Thompson, for as well as he played in that last series, I don't think that he would have, I don't want to say he melted down, but he was not the same after Jacob Slavin scored that overtime goal. And if you notice a lot of the goals he let in, like the Svechnikov series winner, Jordan Stahl's first goal in game 5 that Jordan Stahl scored, those are low percentage shots. You got to have a save from your goaltender in both those situations, and you didn't get them. I see if Carolina is to win this series, it's going to be similar situations to that. All right, that's for another time. Let me remove this. I will take a swig of water here, and then we are going to get to the comments. Let me get back up here. All righty. Oh, that's better. I skated right before I jumped on here, so I haven't had a chance to like down a Gatorade or anything like that. Hey, Frankie. Puppy came over here to say hi. He's a good boy. All right. Fly Henry Fly says, hearing more and more about Gensel's contract makes me realize more and more he should be here sometimes, but it goes like that. Yeah. And they learned their lesson with that. They threw $14 million at Rantanen, and he's gone. He didn't want to stay. And I've made my thoughts on that abundantly clear. No point in me really reiterating it, but at least I think they've learned that lesson. It's just they didn't get the chance to apply it with Rantanen. And honestly, if that's going to be his attitude about stuff, I'm glad he's not here. Yeah, I'll take Logan Stankoven over him any day in this system. Levy Leto, what's up, buddy? I'm seeing almost everyone underestimate the Canes in their series previews, and I'm frankly shocked. It's like they didn't learn from the underestimating us against the Caps, or can't see the Cats are hurt. That's another thing. When it comes to Matthew Tkachuk, he's playing through something. We all know that. Hit him. Hit him a fucking lot. Hit him every chance you get. Hit him clean. Hit him hard. Hit him often. Because he would do it to you. If you throw an extra elbow at whatever might be bothering him a little bit, chicken wing it a little bit just to get an extra little bit of mustard on it, do it. Fuck him up. Within the bounds of the rules. Fuck him up. He would do it to you. Fly Henry Fly says this series will be determined by the goalies. It definitely could. They're going to play a larger part in this one than in Carolina's first two series. I agree with that. Freddie's just got to keep doing what he's doing. Evan Smith says, I never get these notifications. Yeah, I think I'm shadow banned or something, which I don't know why. I don't talk about anything controversial. I don't know what the deal with that is. The best thing for everybody out there, follow me on X. That's going to be the best way for you to know that I'm streaming. Because even when I post stuff in the community tab on YouTube, you may notice I don't really bother doing it anymore because nobody sees it. And I have no idea why. I have thousands at times of returning viewers who aren't subscribed on YouTube. Also, with the way that YouTube does shit. So here's my theory about that. I'll get into that real quick. I think my theory about that is when YouTube starts seeing a channel get big, they maybe nerf it a little bit in terms of visibility, because the closer I get to 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch hours, then I can apply for monetization. And I think that they still want me to labor for free, and I'm not going to do that forever. Eventually, I would like to get to that threshold where I make some money, primarily so I can dump it back into the channel, mostly like get a second monitor. It'll be faster for me to put things together, get a better computer, because I'd like to drop about $5,000 into a really good one. Because I'll be straight with you guys, donations will go towards me getting a new computer, and it's not going to be strictly for this. I play my sim racing games and my flight simulators and stuff like that, and I want something, I want a really good processor for that, and I've already picked out which monitor I want next and all that. I just haven't been able to get to it yet. Levy Leto says Florida has had a few flop games in these playoffs. If they sleep through one or two games, even periods in the series, we have to punish them for that. Absolutely. Couldn't have said that better myself. Fly Henry Fly says when we played them in 2023, we didn't have the players to punish them. Hopefully Svetch is that player. So far, so good for him. Chatty's officially out tonight. We talked about that a little bit. All right, Boone needs to lay the body on a couple of cats tonight then. Yeah, it's just I'm kind of I don't understand the rationale behind that decision. Yeah, Caleb Morrow is playing tonight over Boom. Yeah, I don't understand that, because I thought, so those of you who are watching the live I did where I broke down the Nikishin video, so I'm breaking that down into individual shifts, and I'm going to put some graphics on there to help explain some of the stuff I was talking about, because I rewatched it again and I was just going to clip that whole individual segment, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do that, because one, it's too long, and two, I feel like I need to throw some visual stuff in there to make what I was talking about make sense, because there were some things where I didn't like how I explained it. I knew what point I was trying to get across, but I'm like, wait, did that make sense to everybody? Probably not. So that's my fault. So one of the things I'm going to do to correct that mistake as much as I can is add some graphics in there retroactively to point some things out that I didn't point out, or that I maybe didn't point out verbally before. I noticed by the second period, Nikishin's gaps were getting better. A lot better. That's why he was able to make that really critical defensive play he made on Ovechkin that led to that really good shift that Carolina had right after that, where he got the puck away from Ovechkin. He fell down in the process of getting it away from Stankoven, got on his horse and caught him and got to the puck. And then from there, everything went. That's the type of differences that someone like Nikishin can make in situations like that. Now, I've heard every justification in the book as to why it's Morrow instead of Nikishin. All of them that I've heard are valid, like valid reasoning. They're logical. They're rational. I don't agree with any of them, though. Not one. But like I said, I disagreed with Roslovic being in over Jankowski if Jankowski is healthy. So far, that's been fine. That's worked out just fine. And Roslovic, you know, he's not the greatest guy on the defensive side of things, but what he is good at, offensive zone puck retrievals, he wins faceoffs, and he can shoot. Like, he's got a hell of a shot. So that's other things to consider there. But Nikishin not being in, especially when you could just pair him with Orlov and then leave the other two pairs as normal, I don't understand that. I'm sorry, I don't. I don't think Rod makes bad decisions on purpose. Obviously, he wouldn't have a job if he did, but this one does perplex me a little bit. I know that, you know, people have talked about the language barrier, this, that, and the, I just, there's nothing that makes me agree with that. In practical application, maybe it'll work. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters, but I don't agree with it. No. I can't believe we have to watch Morrow. Morrow's not a bad player, but like, I'm not putting him in the lineup over Nikishin personally. Why do I have a feeling I'm going to be screaming at 56 all night? We'll see. I hope not. Why Rosie over Jank? Just staying with what's working is my only guess. Feel like Jank is a much better fit style for playing an opponent like the Panthers. Get as many big, heavy bodies in there as possible. Yeah, that's it kind of goes back to the whole if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Roslovic's been fine. And there's no way we're going to get through this series without somebody getting banged up. So the likeliness that you'll see Jankowski back in the lineup is pretty good. So we talked about that one already. I think Morrow deserves a shot. At least he will have a look at how they both perform under the big lights and can decide from there. That might be part of the rationale behind it. It's just, I feel like Nikishin, okay, so Morrow is more of a known quantity, but Nikishin is more of a recent known quantity. That's my only thing about it. And then not to mention, you need the physicality. I'm not saying Morrow can't hit people, but he's not Nikishin. So we'll see what happens with it. I don't think it's a good idea. I really don't. But there's been times I've said that about stuff that Rod has done before, and it turned out fine. There's been times where I said Rod made a great decision here, and it turned out not being fine. And at the end of the day, the burden and the consequence is all on him. And he makes those decisions in good faith. Sometimes they don't work out. That's the only thing. But that's the dilemma of everybody who's in a position of leadership of any kind. And in his case, his is very consequential. Heavy lies the crown, and he knows it. So Henry Fly says, I mean, righty versus lefty. Morrow has played in the system, plus not a knock on Nikishin, but he also speaks the same language as the rest of the team. Yeah, I know that that's part of it. And, you know, situations like this is where I feel like the rigid right-handed and left-handed defensive pairs kind of need to be thrown out. The other thing about it is Nikishin only played about 11 minutes in Game 5 versus the Capitals. And, you know, if Morrow ends up playing a lot more than that, like if he plays, say, 13, 14 minutes in regulation, I'll be like, oh, okay, cool, as long as everything is okay. However, I don't see him playing more than 12, and Griff from Caniac Sessions said that before I did, but I think he's spot on with that. J-Dub says, if we lose because of Morrow, I will never forgive Rod. Yeah, I don't agree with that decision. I really don't. Like I said, I could be wrong, but that's just something I don't understand the rationale behind it, especially when you could just put Dima and Nikishin on the same pair, have Nikishin play the left side and Dima play the right because he's capable of it. And then that helps out right there, because that really good shift that Nikishin had in Game 5, he was out there with Orlov. Like, that one situation showed me if you put them out there as a pair, that will be fine. Culinary Adventures with Lewis. I was telling my colleagues that it's going to be a slugfest of a game of who out frustrates who. Yeah, that's the biggest thing you got to remember, especially with that Marchand line. Don't let them get under your skin. That's the thing about that line. Even if they're not scoring, they will piss you off. They will annoy you. They'll hit you. They'll, give you some extra stuff after the whistle. Every little thing they can get away with, they'll do it. And Brad Marchand is just empowering those guys to do it more. But the Hurricanes have eliminated Marchand before. They can do it again. Nikishin only played like 10 minutes last game. He played well, but maybe he's just seeing the comparison between the two. Yeah, I just don't think it's a good time for it. That's all. Caleb Short says whoever wins tonight wins the series. IMO need to get a win to get the monkey off the back early in the series so we can stop hearing the Canes have been swept 12 straight ECF games. That's the biggest thing I want. Dude, I'll be honest with you. I would take Carolina winning this game and losing the next two. I think that would get so much shit out of their system if they just win this one, and us as fans too. I really believe that. I think they just need to just get it the fuck win this game. I can care less if they lose the next two. Of course, I want them to win the series, but I think if they win this one and lose the next two, I don't think that they would give up. I mean, they didn't give up in the last one, until the very end. They tried, but I think that there's a chance that if you win the first game, you set things in motion to win the whole series, even if you lose the next two. So. Flying Reflies, season has already been a success. We just need to win a game. Season has been an overwhelming success. Yes, absolutely. J-Dub says this isn't the time of year for fucking experiments and stupid shit. We've already seen Morrow and that he wasn't good. I don't think Morrow has been bad, but I'm reluctant to introduce him in the playoffs. I will say that. J-Dub says, how long in the series before we hate Bennett too? About the time that the anthem singer says, and home of the brave. And that's that. Spot on says Devil's Joint. My mouse is weird. Bob hasn't been the best goalie in his playoffs, not even top five, but he's still Bob at the end of the day. Yeah, that's the biggest thing to remember. He can come to life at any given moment. Panthers' third line is going to be a problem, says Christopher Cabrera. Yes, you're going to hate them a lot by the end of the series, regardless how it goes. Groza says, I think Stankoven is going to have a good series, and I don't know why. I just really liked watching him the past 2 weeks. Yes, Logan Stankoven was born to be a Hurricane. So, worthwhile trade, especially considering you got other assets for Mikko. Chuck Wright says, so Morrow instead of Nikishin, don't like that. I don't either. I don't really know what else to say about it at this point, though, but I don't think it's a good idea. I honestly more upset that Rosie is in over Janko. He might still be hurt, too. I mean, he might still be playing through something. Now, if Carolina wins, then you leave Rolex in the lineup. Chuck Wright says, I'm with you on that too. Fly Henry Fly, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yep, that's the biggest thing. Like now, if Carolina loses this game and Jankowski is healthy, especially like depending on how Roslovic plays or depending on how the whole thing goes, and you feel like you need that extra depth forward that's more defensively minded than Roslovic, then it becomes a different story. Dylan Bollinger says, wanted Nicky to get a home game in. Yeah, me too. We'll see. Devil's Joint, LOL. It wasn't broke with Nikishin, so what's the point? I don't know. That's one of those things you're going to have to ask Rod. I will say people saying Morrow is small or dumb. He's 6'2", 210. Yeah, Morrow's a big kid. They're like, yeah, no, he ain't small. Morrow has the ability down the line, if he improves the defensive side of his game, to be kind of like another Brady Shea with a extra gear of playmaking ability. Because Shea was a defense first and snipe from the point type of player. Morrow has a lot of those things. Well, one, he's a better skater. Two, he's got the size. And he's got really good vision. Like he's good at making, whether it's those little 3-4 foot coast to coast passes, or if he needs to send 180 feet and get someone on a breakaway. Morrow is good at both those things. The only questions around Morrow is his gaps, which he's aware of. Like he's talked about that in interviews about improving his gaps and how he wants to really improve that part of his game. Morrow's a smart kid. He's big. He's got a lot going for him. He's got a tremendous upside and a great ceiling. I do have some concerns about his game, but overall, I'm not super worried about it. But this is a kind of a nerve-wracking situation to introduce him to the NHL playoffs. That's the only thing. But we're going to see how it works out. I'm going to give it a chance to work out. I don't agree with it at this time, but we're going to see how it works out. Chuck Wright, I'm saying he does not have the talent of Nikishin size or not. I agree with that for the most part. Fly Henry Fly says, I don't know. Honestly, we'll see how it works out. But if Morrow has a great game, you all owe him an apology. Yeah, I will. I will. I mean, I'm still apologizing to Eric Robinson, who I thought would be on the second line of the Chicago Wolves, and he's been one of our best and most consistent forwards all season. Do they bring in an English tutor during the offseason? I'd imagine like either that or Orlov and Svetch and, PK and all them are going to like teach him English. If he starts swearing a lot, which one of those three were doing the predominant English teaching at that point. Watch Morrow go out there and score. Go out there and score, but also don't get scored on. And the other thing I think worries me a little bit about Morrow is the fact that he's paired with Ghost. Now, granted, I have said on multiple occasions, Ghost's defensive game is very underrated. If it's good enough to take care of Morrow, though, we will see. Probably already have. Chuck Wright says, love to be wrong on that, but what we miss is elite shooting from blue line. Nikishin has that. He made 3 plays last game. Morrow simply cannot make. Yeah, Morrow probably does not have the shot velocity that Nikishin has. It's that we're just gonna have to wait and see how that turns out. Levy Lato says, certainly hope so. I love Coach Chekhov, but I don't think him teaching Boom my English is ideal. Yeah, because very first interview. That's so, Sasha, how was your first game? I fuck puck or something like some shit like that will come out of his mouth and everybody will laugh. Cavery, what's up, dude? Hopefully Stanky can take care of Marsh. Yeah, dude, those guys are so similar. If you put them out there in all black sweaters and covered their faces, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. Like, that's how similar they play. Like, even their skating mechanics are really similar. No. They need to win game 2. I'm going to it. Yeah, ideally, yeah. I just tonight is like tonight. I'm not looking at this as a series myself. Tonight, I'm looking at this game in isolation. I have Game 7 fucking feelings about this game. I really do. Evan Smith says, we sure as hell aren't getting swept this round. I know these guys want revenge. Yeah, and we've got the whole team this time, too. Evan hopes so, but Florida is better than 2 years ago now, scary as that is. Yeah, they are. That's the reality of the matter. Florida is a better team now than they were 2 seasons ago. J-Dub says Nikisha knew for a few years he was coming over and he didn't care to learn a little English. I don't know why. He probably learned a little bit, but it's like learning enough to be able to play the fastest game in the world at a breakneck pace than its best league. That's a different story. I'm sure he learned a little bit, if I had to guess, but learning enough to be able to have as much as you need and recognize what's being said, process it, and say things back. That's one other thing. Another thing to consider, there was when I was in the military, I worked with some linguists at times, and all of them had one universal thing in common in thoughts when it came to the English language. They said that the English language is one of, if not the hardest one to learn. And one of the reasons that I know that is these linguists would tell me there's a lot of things that we have in English that we have 3 and 4 words for, where a lot of other languages only have 1 or 2. That's one of the things. We have one of the more complicated alphabets, one of the more variable vocabularies and, things like that. That would be funny, to be honest, mind games. Or Dylan Bollinger asked, what if Rod is playing mind games? Haha, he ain't, but what if? That would be kind of funny. That would be funny, to be honest. Mind games with Mo. Yeah, Chuck, but we're healthier. We're healthy this time. True that. Chuck Wright also says, I'm trying to be hopeful heading for Section 117, top row in just a few. Have fun at the game. I will try to make – I was going to try and make this one today, but I'm actually – so here's the thing. One of the reasons I wanted to do this stream so badly, I don't know when I'm going to be doing my next one. I might do some pre-recorded videos because I'm starting a new job here in the coming days. So Thursday I'll be able to watch the game, but I have to go to a 2-hour orientation course for something. So I will probably do a pregame show that day, but that's going to be like about all I can really do. I'm going to try and do damage report after this game, unless I go out to watch the game, which I haven't ruled out yet. Fly Fly says Jalen Chatfield is still questionable. I haven't seen nowhere that he's ruled out. Well, let me go look at something real quick, because Walt or Corey will have the answer for that potentially. Okay, I don't see nothing here. Let me check Corey. Where is it? I know I follow the guy. There it is. Okay, 36 minutes Pat Welter from WRAL just talked to Rod Brennamore. Jalen Chatfield is out tonight despite skating this morning. Scott Morrow will make his playoff debut. Okay, so that is definitively official. Okay, there's no question about that. Dylan Bollinger says it's because he had that turnover, I bet, that led to that offside goal. Yeah, but I mean, in the grand scheme of things, like that was a mistake. But still, I don't think that it. I don't know, man. I'm just gonna have to wait and see how it turns out. My son wearing Sean Hill's 22 tonight. Sean Hill was one of my first favorite players. Sean loved me wearing that jersey in Game 7 in 2006. Since all the other 22s at that game were dude in the bathrobe. I can't remember his name. Yeah. Fuck. What? Are you thinking about Mike Commodore? Because I'm thinking about bathrobes, and that's the first name that comes to mind. Morrow seems like he projects to be the type of guy the Norris Trophy voters love to vote for with his offensive talent. Just needs to keep developing. I like Morrow's offense. I like Nikishin's better. Yeah, both of them are going to bring offense. I'm still of the mind that I have a feeling Morrow's going to get traded during the offseason for something Carolina needs more. I could totally see that happening. But so that's the last of the comments here and everything like that. Let me take a swig of water here. I'll discuss a couple more things. Sky, what's up, buddy? Left versus right-handed. That's why Morrow is in over Nikishin, if you haven't covered that yet. Yeah, I talked about that a little bit, and that's why I also said this is one of those times where I feel like they can maybe not worry about that so much and just have the two left-handed defensemen on one pair with Nikishin and Orlov together. I think that's one of those times where you kind of got to bend that rule, but I'm going to wait and see how it works out. I think Levy Lato says Money Puck is giving us 54.1 odds. Yeah, I saw that when I was on there earlier, getting some stats together with betting sites, implied odds betting even better for us, all despite people underestimating us. I rarely think we are favorites, at least in home games. If they're going to, the way that I see this series unfolding, I'm glad you mentioned the home games thing. And Dylan, yeah, you're right. Nikishin can play both sides. It's a lot harder to do at the NHL level. That's why I would say put him on the left and have Orlov on the right. Like I said, I just don't personally agree with the decision on that, but there's been times where Rod's made decisions. I'm like, what the fuck? And then everything was fine. So that's the result I'm hoping for this time. Now, as far as the way that this series is going to go, I think Carolina wins in 7 if they drag it out. And I think it's going to be I can totally see this being a case of both teams win at home, or both teams win all their home games. And that's how it ends. Carolina wins it in Game 7 at home. I can totally see that. Alrighty. Well, everybody, I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do for dinner. And I'm going to pack my gear back up because it's been drying. I thank you all very much for joining me. I will do my best to do damage report after this game. If nothing else, I will try and do it tomorrow. But tomorrow, me and that dog over there are going to go to the beach. He's never got to go. Me, my girlfriend, and we took both of our dogs. We went to go take them to one of the beaches around here a couple of days ago, and they actually didn't allow dogs on there during the hours that we were there. We have no idea why, but that was the rule. So we just went and sat down somewhere, watched the Braves game, had some oysters, and it was a good day either way. But what I am going to do is take Frank to a beach that I know that I can take him to tomorrow. And because I've been wanting to do that with him for years and we never got the chance. So we're going to do it this time, and I'm going to let him, see if he likes it. I think he will. He likes to be mentally stimulated. The Chihuahua's kind of a bitch. He just fucking would sit there and shiver in his little purse anyway. I love him, but that dog is such a pussy. But if I was a 7-pound dog, I think I would be afraid of everything too. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. I will be posting on X during the game. I may post a couple of little videos from my phone during the game. I will be watching this intently. Thank you guys again for all the support you've given me. If you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe and turn on the notifications. In the event that you are subscribed, please double check and make sure you're still subscribed. I don't know why it's wiping subscribers out on occasion the way it is. It's just one of those weird things with YouTube. The best thing you can do is follow me on X, and you'll be able to stay up to date with me a little bit better over there. I will see you guys hopefully after a Canes win and a broken curse. See ya.